What's up, folks? Back with another reaction. Back with some more hard trance, I guess. Hard trance is a label that's used in several different ways. Even if you're talking specifically about the 90s, there's again, a label like EDM from Germany with artists like Kokuma or Gary D. That's going to be a different sound than you'd get with, say, Eve and Pablo Gargano and Teleka, or also going to be a little bit different than you get from the Noom, Commander Tom and that sort of sound. So hard trance is used in a few different ways, but I think generally speaking, this track and the original upon which it is based would be categorized as hard trance, classified or categorized, but not at the same time. But yeah, we're going to listen to the second release by The Shrink. Originally a trio, and then I think one of the guys left the group, so it became a duo. I was looking on Discogs, there's not too much information on the individual guys, not even a country of origin for any of them. I know they produce tunes under other names like Aura, like A-U-R-A, as well as like a dozen other different aliases. I think this is like the one track from all the different aliases that like really hit, because this was definitely a sort of hit in the trance scene in the mid to late 90s. The original version of Nervous Breakdown by The Shrink, and for the record I have 2 copies of this, I think that was 96, and I forget the tune on the other side, but the original version of Nervous Breakdown was called the Original Rohypnol Mix, and then this came out in 1998, and there's 3 remixes, one by The Shrink themselves, and that's the one we're going to listen to, and it's just called The Shrink Remix. But there's also a Jonesy remix. Jonesy made like hard house, sort of hard house on the edge of hard trance, turn of the millennium. I believe Bulletproof, kind of same thing. That's Paul Chambers. And yeah, I have some other Bulletproof tunes. I have the Bulletproof mix, not just on the 2 copies I have of this, but there's like another, I have like a white label, and one of the tracks on the record is the Bulletproof remix of this, so, yeah, I don't remember where I got that. I think it was a physical record store. I think I got it in Vinyl Fetish up in Hollywood, but either way, I remember like hearing it, like, wait a minute, this is The Shrink, the Nervous Breakdown remix. I didn't remember the name of the remixer, but yeah, it was the Bulletproof one. But as I said, we're going to listen to the original, or the Shrink remix, which is to say the original group remixing their own track. For people who haven't heard this, I almost don't want to spoil it, so we'll get into it and I'll talk about it in the moment. But what I will say is this is a tune that even people who I hung out with back in the day who didn't really go to rave parties, and people I knew just from school, or people who I went to punk shows with or whatever, this was a track that turned heads. It was a track that even people and also there were people who were into the rave scene but not so much trance. Maybe it was like hardcore, jungle. So yeah, I saw people who were into other types of electronic music but not trance, as well as people who weren't even into electronic music at all, hear this tune and go, hey, that is pretty interesting. That was a pretty cool tune. So I would say this tune has like appeal beyond the more dedicated following of like 90s trance heads, so we'll see if that's the case for anyone watching here. But yeah, without further ado, let's get it. This is Nervous Breakdown by The Shrink, and it's their own remix, The Shrink Remix, appropriately enough. And let me just say, this track is an experience. There's like another contender, but in terms of tracks I played at parties back in the day, this tune maybe got the biggest reaction out of any track I would play, any type of set. My original run of playing rave parties, I played like a lot of hard trance, like acid trance sets. It was generally a mix of like acid trance, hard trance, and hard house. But again, like of all the tracks I played, it was on that deep sort of echoic acid bass line. But admittedly, the original Rohypnol mix is even like bigger and louder. Here is kind of like the floaty, like partially dematerialized version. Like cowbell rhythm. Well, it's like loud and clattery, like hi-hats. If you you know this tune, you know what's coming. My God. I will tell you an anecdote after the track about this part. Getting like goosebumps thinking about when I first heard this at a party and I was like, oh my God, what is this? Buddy of mine, before we knew what it was called, he was like, bro, you gotta get that alarm track, you gotta get that record. So until I knew it was called Nervous Breakdown, this was the alarm track. And I like those sort of cheeky like flares at the end. But here's the... I don't normally do this, I'm going to do this very briefly. The two major differences with the original Rohypnol mix and this. As I mentioned, the original Rohypnol mix has a like heavier, kind of like deeper bass. Whereas this one is similar, but it's more kind of like floaty and trippy. But the major difference is the original, it does what it just did, but it goes into a breakdown with that alarm sort of melody, if you will, and it builds up and it builds up and it's a huge build and it drops. This does the same thing, but it throws in a twist. People always dug this part, the slow down, speed up. Especially when the snare comes in, because everyone's like, okay. Many a good night in the late 90s is what this makes me think of. A lot of people think of like 90s rave parties, they think of tracks like this. I love this sort of like telegraph, like stripped down version on the way out. The acid is really like, really standing out in that moment. Acid crickets up every now and then. Forgot it came back until right at that moment. Good God, what a tune. tune, I think, on my old channel, and the reason I remember that is because I remember having to tell the anecdote that relates to using this as a final track in a set, which is to say, one of the first parties I played, maybe like the second or third one, this would have been like early 2000, because the first party I played was late 99. I don't even remember the name of it, because it was like a last minute thing. The next one I think was like something fresh thank you party, and that was like late January of 2000. I think it was January 2000. I think it was that party. This was a tune that I had recently, maybe like a year before this, but you know, I didn't play it at the first party that I played. So I was very excited to like play this, and I was like, oh, you know, it's such a like great, like, you know, monumental tune, like, you know, nothing can really follow it, so I'm gonna finish with this track. Cool. So I mix and I get to the end of the set and I mix into this track, and the first anecdote is that part where it is that sort of like austere kind of suspenseful build-up where it gets sort of like quiet, and it's just that sort of steady and the rising snare build, and then it finally launches into the alarm for the first time. That moment, you can mix into that without sort of tipping your hand, meaning that little sort of like, I don't know, I think it's like a side of a snare sort of hit, but there's a full like 32 between the start of the build-up and the end of that section, and again, there's no kick drum in that section, it's just that little tap and then an increasingly large build. So on the way out of an outgoing track, you can drop that part with the alarm, kicking it over right at the last second, and it works really well, it takes people by surprise. So yeah, I did that into Nervous Breakdown for the last track, so like it was a really dramatic moment. People were like, oh shit, they really enjoyed it like when that part dropped. But then it was the last tune, so you know, people who play parties, you know, like once you mix into your last track, you sort of get out of the way, and then the new DJ comes in, he starts getting his first track ready, and you know, if he's going to mix a very different tempo than you, maybe he'll start to adjust the tempo a little bit just to kind of like make it so the audience doesn't go from, let's say you're spinning very fast, like 160 or something, he doesn't drop it down to 130 like suddenly. But generally speaking, you know, while your last track is playing, the new DJ is in the spot getting ready to do his set or her set. And I remember I mixed into this, it sort of got a big reaction and people were enjoying it, so you know, the next DJ is about to get on, and it was my friend Matt, who went by the name Asylum, I think it was. And so he was about to start playing, and I was kind of up by the front, like just, you know, enjoying the tune, because, you know, you hear your records all the time in your own setup, but this was, you know, it was a big, like, party, like, setup, a big rig. So I was sort of enjoying how it was sounding on the big rig, and there were these, like, two girls there, and they're like, hey, and I was like, okay, what's up? And they were like, hey, who's this playing right now? And I was like, well, that's Asylum over there, but the record playing right now is still the last record of my set. But by the time I finished saying, that's Asylum over there, they're like, oh, Asylum, great, thanks. And I was like, well, it's not his record, but whatever. So that was a funny moment, and it made me think, like, you know, if you really want to like get credit for playing a track, you can't do it as the last track, which again, that's just silly, like, DJ ego stuff. But I felt like sort of short change. I was like, wait a minute, like, I chose to play this record, you enjoyed it, but now like you're gonna want to see Asylum on the party DJ list, not Shnootz. So yeah, that was a funny quirk. But again, it's a really cool tune. The original Rohypnol mix, it's like maybe even a little more dramatic, but I think this version, because of that slow down, speed up section, as it turns out, like, it's not quite the second half of the tune, it's like the middle third of the tune, because there's still that, it seems like it's going into an outro, and then it comes back one more time, which I didn't even remember until right before it happened. So that was really cool. Anyway, let me know what you think. Again, this is a tune I've seen, you know, get people's interest, even if they weren't necessarily into trance music or electronic music more generally, so perhaps that will be the case, but do let me know what you think. Other than that, I will see you next time. Peace.